1.
Today, I would like to begin with a glance towards the saints that surround the sanctuary here at St. Leonard's Church. As you know, there are many saints there. With so many to choose from, I have decided to speak briefly today on our Franciscan confrere, St Paschal Baylon, popularly known as St Paschal or St Paschal. Some may say that he's an obscure saint. However, I assure you that it is far from the truth. St Paschal Baylon was born in 1540 on Pentecost, known in Spanish as Paschal de Pentecoste, thus the name Paschal. This was the golden age of the Spanish saints, such as St Ignatius of Loyola, founder of the Jesuits, the Carmelite reformers, St Teresa of Avila, and St John of the Cross. St Peter of Alcantara, another reformer, but of the Franciscan order, who also was spiritual director to the great St Teresa of Avila. St Peter of Alcantara started the reform of the Franciscans, to which eventually we'll see that St Paschal joined. Also, among the saints of the great Spanish Golden Age were St. Thomas of Villanova, St. Peter Baptist and companions, the martyrs of Japan, St. Francis Solano, who was the apostle to the indigenous people of South America. Paschal Baylon was born of devout parents into a deeply religious family. He was illiterate and was sent to pasture the sheep. However, he had such a desire to pray the little office of the Blessed Virgin Mary, he tried in every way to learn how to read and write, even stopping people along the way and asked them what was this letter or what was this word. He eventually taught himself to read and write, not so that he could be an educated person or that he could do other things. It was basically so that he could read the prayers and read the gospel. And he became very good in reading and writing. As he grew to be an adult, he desired more and more to enter religious life. And one of his friends suggested to him to join the Cistercians that were nearby. However, he felt that they were such an established order and that he would be very comfortable there. He had heard of the new observance of the Alcantarans, and he went all the way to Valencia, which was quite a distance from his own home, to become a Franciscan. However, again, disappointment in life, he was not accepted right away. In fact, he got a job tending the sheep as he had done at home, and went frequently to the friary. And the friars over the next few years saw how devout he was and realized that he possibly could live this austere life, because as we know, St. Peter of Alcantara founded a reform of the order which were called the Franciscans of the strictest observance. And once Paschal was accepted, he became one of the most fervent in living out the rule. In fact, as we know, he recommended to the friars when they asked for his prayers that he would say to them, "I pray that you will observe the holy rule." He also was noted for always carrying the rule with him, and this way he would know that he would have to check with that to see what he was doing. He also followed all the observances of this new reform. He was now 24 years old when he entered. He was an obedient friar, and whatever he was asked to do, whether it was the porter or the cook or whatever they asked him to do in the community, he was always willing to do it and do it well. He was always united with Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament. As you saw when we looked at the picture there, St. Paschal is always represented or shown with the Eucharist, whether it be the monstrance or the host. And this was because from an early age, he had this deep devotion to the Eucharist. Even when he was in the fields or with the flocks, he would pray to the Eucharist when he heard the bells ringing at the church, and became very united with the Eucharistic Lord. We were told also that like Mother Teresa of Calcutta. He saw Jesus, believed fervently in Jesus in the Eucharist, but also realized that Jesus was in the poor. He was very generous when people came to the door, whatever their needs may be. He also was very kind to the children and to the sick. We're told that many times he performed miracles as well. He never made much of himself. He was a very humble man, and he tried always to be charitable and kind to all those in his community. As a Franciscan, he sought to imitate our Father St. Francis in his love of the Blessed Sacrament. We know of St. Francis's great love of the Eucharist and how he always wanted churches to be clean and kept in order. In fact, we're told in his biography that many times he would go sweep out churches and he would introduce different things that would be sure that the church was clean, such as the pall over the chalice, that no particles would fall into the chalice, and also that the tabernacle was kept clean and orderly. In fact, St. Francis, in his great observance of poverty, would not spare anything to make sure that all the things were good for the church. So we say St. Paschal following in this Franciscan tradition. Also, when St. Francis saw a church or went into a church, he would always say, "We adore thee, O Christ, most holy Lord Jesus Christ, here and in all your churches throughout the world, and we bless you because by your holy cross you have redeemed the world." Again, St. Paschal imitated Christ, who was obedient even to death on the cross. He accepted to bring a message to the Minister General who was in Paris. Really, no one wanted to do this, but St. Paschal told his provincial, "I will go." And this meant walking for 700 miles over the Pyrenees to Paris. And as difficult as this would be in normal times, France had the Protestant revolt, and they would kill anybody who came through at that time. As Paschal Baylon crossed the Pyrenees into France, the first friary he went to, they recommended that he turn back to Spain. And he said, "No, the provincial has asked me under obedience to go to Paris." But also, the provincial wasn't cruel, because he told him, "You don't have to go if you find it too difficult." And he said, "No, for the love of Jesus and the Blessed Sacrament, I will be glad to go to Paris." And he goes through this part of France which had destroyed some of the friaries, and friars were very much hated at that time. And as he went through, they would throw stones at him. He would defend the doctrine of the Eucharist, and also his loyalty to the Holy Father, the Pope. We see this also in other Franciscans. At this same time, in Holland, a group of friars, Franciscans, but also some other religious, were taken to a barn and hung. And if some of us recall that one time there was a painting here at St. Leonard's that showed the martyrs of Gorkum. Well, this was at the same time. They were taken and they were martyrs of the Eucharist and for their fidelity to the Holy Father. St. Paschal was the same thing. He was hurt very badly and left for dead, but a good woman took him to her house and nursed him back to somewhat of good health. He continued his journey to Paris, where he brought the message to the Minister General at that time. On his return to Spain, the friars could barely recognize him. He had become so weak and so old from this almost martyrdom. And some believe that he deserved the title of Martyr of the Eucharist. Even though he didn't die, he suffered very much. At his death, in the next few years, he's continued his life there. At his death, he received all the sacraments 8 days before he was to die. And when he died a very holy death, surrounded by the friars of his fraternity. At the funeral mass, he had such great devotion to the Eucharist that we're told by eyewitnesses under oath that he passed. Now, of course, people realized his sanctity, so for 3 days, they could not stop the crowds from coming to see his body there in the church. Eventually, they had to close the church and bury him. After some time, they exhumed him, and he was completely incorrupt. They reburied him, and again after many years, because his cause for beatification and canonization were introduced by this time, he was found incorrupt. Unfortunately, over the years, many that hated the church got his body and threw it in the street. The first time they retrieved it, brought it back to the monastery, and then under this revolution with the communists in Spain, his body was taken out again, thrown in the street, and burned. But they said it was one of the best examples of complete preservation. Now we have, of course, the relics of his bones, because eventually they went and got the bones, retrieved them, and brought them back to the monastery. Now, the devotion to St. Paschal spread throughout the order and the church. We know at this time, this was considered the golden age of saints, but as it was said, it was the best of times, but it also was the worst of times. We know that at this time it was Martin Luther, Calvin, and of course Henry VIII. So at this time also people were being martyred in England and in other parts of Europe. The church was being destroyed. However, this humble Franciscan built up the church where he was and encouraged the friars of his community to go to the New World. So don't forget, this is 1540. This is 1492, is the discovery of America by the Spanish crown. But the Spanish crown went to the New World, but also went to the Philippines. And also the other friars went to India. They brought this devotion to St. Paschal wherever they went. So in the beginning, I said, as some TV program has its title, Obscure Saints, St. Paschal really is not obscure, because wherever you go in southern Italy, you will find churches and altars and statues dedicated to St. Paschal Baylon. And if you go to the New World, such as in Mexico and South America, you'll see churches dedicated to St. Paschal Baylon. And as the missionaries from Mexico went to the Philippines, they also brought devotion to St. Paschal Baylon. And in California, there's a city called St Paschal, and also in the Philippines. So we know that this does exist. Now, eventually he was beatified because he had so many miracles, and not even 100 years later, before even the founder of his reform, he was canonized a saint. Now, he also, with the Archbishop of Valencia, was so impressed by St. Paschal that he asked the minister provincial for a relic of St. Paschal. And when the minister provincial brought him this relic, he says, "Is this possible that these simple people are gaining heaven before us?" He says, "I think we should burn all our books." And the minister provincial said to him, "I don't think burning the books will do it. I think first we need to burn our pride." And so this also goes back to St. Francis, who gave permission to St. Anthony to teach theology. He said, "You may teach theology, but do not extinguish the spirit of prayer and devotion." And even St. Paschal, speaking to the professors and preachers of his province, he says, "Apply yourselves to prayer instead of continuous reading of books." So we see him, especially if we had more time, he gives different advice to people, and as originally an illiterate man, he wrote a few books on devotion, and of course many of his sayings have come down to our time. Now, through all this, Leo XIII in 1897 wrote a papal document declaring that St. Paschal Baylon is the patron of all Eucharistic congresses and associations in perpetuity. That from now on, even those who were founded before and founded later always have St. Paschal Baylon as their patron. And the letter is very long, but basically he said, I had to look at all the saints dedicated to and devoted to the Eucharist, and I believe, on my authority as the Pope, that St. Paschal Baylon is the most appropriate and the most deserving of being this patron. And he lists out the saints, but St. Paschal is the first among them. So what can we learn from this? I think we can learn from St. Paschal that we need to strengthen our belief in the Eucharist. How do we do that? First of all, our attendance at Mass. Also, when we come to church, someone once said, when you go to see an important person, who do you greet first? The dog or the master? And sometimes when we come to church, we greet everybody except for the master of our church, Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament. So we should bring that to mind, that as important as it is to greet other people, when we come to church, our first desire should be to genuflect, to kneel, to pray before the Eucharist, and not worry about what other people are wearing or what they're doing or what they have to say. It's important that we see that Jesus is here, and we have to show that even by our external behavior, not turning around, talking, and all the other things that we see, unfortunately, in our churches today. So I'd like to conclude by saying that we should pray to St. Paschal Baylon, realize that when we come to the church, we see him adoring the Eucharist, and that we should imitate him in that. And in concluding, I would like to say, as St. Paschal would want us to say, we adore thee, most holy Lord Jesus Christ, here and in all your churches throughout the world, and we bless you because by your holy cross you have redeemed the world. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you so much, Brother Gabriel, for a beautiful presentation. And if I could, how would you give advice to someone, say, I'm living in the North End and I just heard about this amazing saint? What do you think he would say to somebody living in this neighborhood on how to get closer to Jesus, or how has he affected your life and your devotion and your faith with Jesus?
Well, from when I first entered, or even before I entered, I knew something about St. Paschal. But as time went on, I would learn more and more about him. Then when I was at the Franciscan Center, we did a series on the saints, and as we have St. Paschal here, also in Andover, we had these circular images around the church, and one of them was St. Paschal. And people were always curious to know who this saint was. So I sort of looked up more. English is very deficient in Franciscan saints. So you have to either know Italian or Spanish, or to try and find some translation. However, we are blessed, believe it or not, with the internet. And we can find so many things about the saints, not only of our order, but of the whole church. One thing I do have that I always treasured was a picture of St. Paschal Baylon. And this is a picture of him as a young man, and it shows him, in my opinion, adoring the Eucharist, which is up there. And he had such great devotion that we know that even when he was away from the church, he was always united with Christ, because he was assigned to many tasks. However, as time went on, I spoke to a group on St. Paschal Baylon, and one of the religious that was there had said, he was an iconographer, he said, I have never done an icon of St. Paschal. So months later, he came to visit me, and with the permission of his superior, he gave me this icon of St. Paschal Baylon. Now, if you notice the difference, and I wouldn't want to take credit for this, but one of our superiors from Rome came to visit, and he said, I showed him this icon, and he said to me, you know what's different? Is St. Paschal now has become part of the Eucharist, because the Eucharist is in front of him, it's not away from him. So I would like to think that the original picture that I showed you was St. Paschal as a young man. This is when he's older, and because of his love and devotion for Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament, he no longer was just himself. He was also united in a special way with the Eucharist.
Thank you so much. God bless you.
Thank you.